Behind the glittering facade of old Hollywood's golden age lay stories of extraordinary courage and resilience that audiences never knew existed. While millions watched their favorite stars dance across ballroom floors, deliver powerful performances, and create cinematic magic, few realized the agonizing pain many endured between action and cut. These legendary performers battled debilitating diseases, chronic conditions, and life-threatening illnesses in silence, refusing to let their suffering derail their careers or disappoint their fans. Today, we're pulling back the velvet curtain to reveal the remarkable true stories of 10 old Hollywood icons who gave brilliant performances while fighting their own bodies. 1. Katharine Hepburn, Essential Tremor. The legendary Katharine Hepburn, known for her fierce independence and memorable performances in classics like The Philadelphia Story and The African Queen, carried a secret throughout most of her 7-decade career. Hepburn suffered from essential tremor, a neurological condition that caused involuntary shaking of her head and hands. Though many mistook it for Parkinson's disease, essential tremor is a separate condition that worsened as she aged. What made Hepburn's situation particularly challenging was Hollywood's demand for physical perfection and control. In an era when any perceived weakness could end a career, especially for strong female leads, she masterfully concealed her condition through careful positioning, strategic camera angles, and sheer force of will. During close-ups, she would grip objects tightly or press her hands together to minimize visible trembling. Her distinctive speaking voice and deliberate mannerisms, which became her trademark, were partially developed to mask the tremor's effects. Directors who worked with her later in life recall her frustration during takes when the shaking became noticeable, though she rarely complained. Despite this challenge, Hepburn won 4 Academy Awards for Best Actress, a record that still stands today. She continued working into her 80s, never publicly acknowledging her condition until late in life. Her determination to never be defined by her illness exemplified the resilience that made her both a Hollywood legend and a feminist icon, proving that physical limitations need not limit artistic achievement. 2. James Stewart, Anxiety and Depression. Jimmy Stewart, America's beloved everyman with the distinctive drawl and aw-shucks demeanor, battled severe mental health issues that nearly destroyed him. Though he projected warmth and stability on screen in films like It's a Wonderful Life and Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, Stewart suffered from crippling anxiety and depression, particularly after serving as a bomber pilot during World War II. He flew numerous combat missions over Germany, experiencing the trauma of watching crew members die and carrying the weight of command decisions that cost lives. When he returned to Hollywood in 1945, he was a changed man. Friends noticed he had aged dramatically, suffered from nightmares, and struggled with what we now recognize as post-traumatic stress disorder, though the term didn't exist then. The studio system had no patience for mental health struggles, viewing them as weakness or lack of professionalism. Stewart forced himself through filming even during severe depressive episodes, sometimes requiring multiple takes because he couldn't focus through his anxiety. Director Frank Capra deliberately cast him in It's a Wonderful Life shortly after the war. Believing the role might be therapeutic, the character George Bailey's breakdown and suicidal despair mirrored Stewart's own dark thoughts. Stewart later admitted that scene required little acting. He self-medicated with alcohol for years and withdrew socially, though he maintained his professional reputation impeccably. His wife Gloria became his anchor, helping him manage his symptoms privately. Stewart never sought formal treatment, fearing it would leak to the press and destroy his wholesome image. Instead, he suffered in silence, channeling his pain into increasingly complex performances that revealed depths audiences hadn't seen in his earlier work. 3. Joan Crawford, obsessive-compulsive disorder. Joan Crawford built a legendary career playing powerful, glamorous women, but behind her carefully crafted image lay a consuming battle with obsessive-compulsive disorder that controlled every aspect of her life. Crawford's OCD manifested in extreme cleanliness rituals, perfectionism that bordered on mania, and rigid routines she couldn't break without experiencing severe anxiety. On set, she would arrive hours early to clean her dressing room personally, scrubbing every surface with disinfectant and arranging items in precise order. She couldn't tolerate anyone touching her belongings or disrupting her systematic organization. Co-stars recalled her washing her hands until they were raw and refusing to shake hands with people she deemed unclean. Her homes were maintained like sterile museums, with white furniture covered in plastic and specific pathways for walking that couldn't be deviated from. The slightest imperfection in her appearance or surroundings could trigger paralyzing anxiety attacks that delayed filming. Directors learned to work around her compulsions, scheduling extra time for her preparation rituals and avoiding last-minute script changes that would destabilize her. Crawford's OCD intensified as she aged, and her career declined, with the rituals becoming more elaborate and time-consuming. She self-medicated with vodka, which temporarily eased her anxiety, but created additional problems. The condition remained undiagnosed throughout her life, as mental health issues were poorly understood and highly stigmatized in her era. What appeared to others as extreme vanity or difficult behavior was actually a desperate attempt to manage overwhelming compulsions. Despite this daily struggle, Crawford delivered powerful performances in films like Mildred Pierce, for which she won an Oscar, and Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. Her ability to maintain Hollywood stardom for over 4 decades while battling such a severe disorder demonstrates remarkable resilience and dedication to her craft. 4. Cary Grant, lifelong anxiety and identity issues. The epitome of sophisticated charm and effortless elegance, Cary Grant projected an image of supreme confidence and control that masked profound psychological struggles. Born Archibald Leach in England, Grant spent his entire life battling severe anxiety, depression, and identity issues stemming from childhood trauma. His mother was institutionalized when he was young, and he was told she had died, a lie he discovered as an adult that fundamentally shook his sense of reality. Throughout his career in films like North by Northwest and Bringing Up Baby, Grant suffered from panic attacks and crippling self-doubt, never believing he was truly worthy of his success. He once famously said, "Everyone wants to be Cary Grant. Even I want to be Cary Grant," revealing the disconnect between his public persona and private self. The constant performance of being Cary Grant exhausted him and intensified his anxiety. He developed pre-filming rituals to manage his nerves and often required numerous takes, not due to lack of talent, but because anxiety disrupted his concentration. In the 1950s, before LSD was illegal, Grant underwent therapeutic LSD sessions attempting to treat his psychological issues. Over 100 sessions in total. He claimed these experiences helped him confront childhood trauma and reduce his anxiety, though the relief was temporary. Grant's struggles with his identity extended to his British accent, which he carefully crafted and maintained, but which represented another layer of performance anxiety. He feared being found out as a fraud, despite being one of Hollywood's biggest stars for 3 decades. His 4 failed marriages reflected his internal turmoil and inability to maintain intimate relationships while managing his condition. Grant retired from acting at 62, exhausted from the constant battle to appear effortlessly charming while fighting internal chaos. 5. Rita Hayworth, early-onset Alzheimer's disease. Rita Hayworth, the 1940s love goddess, known for her stunning beauty and sensual performances in films like Gilda, faced a cruel fate that robbed her of her identity and career far too early. In the late 1960s, while still working, Hayworth began experiencing memory problems, confusion, and unpredictable behavior that many attributed to alcoholism. However, she was actually suffering from early-onset Alzheimer's disease, though it wouldn't be properly diagnosed until 1980. During her final films in the early 1970s, she struggled to remember lines, became disoriented on set, and experienced personality changes that baffled cast and crew. Directors noticed she would forget scenes immediately after filming them, and sometimes didn't recognize people she'd worked with for years. The stigma surrounding both alcoholism and mental decline meant Hayworth faced judgment rather than compassion during these years. Studios became reluctant to hire her as her reliability decreased, effectively ending her career before anyone understood the true nature of her condition. Her daughter, Princess Yasmin Aga Khan, later revealed that symptoms had appeared as early as her late 50s, meaning Hayworth had been battling the disease's early stages during her final performances. The confusion and fear she must have experienced while trying to maintain her professional reputation is heartbreaking to consider. Alzheimer's was poorly understood in that era, and early-onset cases were rarely diagnosed correctly. Hayworth became increasingly reclusive as her symptoms worsened, aware something was terribly wrong but unable to get proper help. Her diagnosis eventually brought much-needed attention to Alzheimer's disease, with her daughter becoming a prominent advocate for research. The contrast between Hayworth's glamorous image and her tragic decline highlighted the devastating nature of the disease and helped reduce stigma around discussing it publicly. 6. Buster Keaton, alcoholism and depression. Buster Keaton, the great stone-faced comedian whose death-defying stunts and innovative silent films made him one of cinema's pioneers, fought a devastating battle with alcoholism and depression that nearly destroyed everything he built. Though his condition might not seem like a disease in the traditional medical sense, alcoholism is now recognized as a chronic disease, and Keaton's case was severe. His drinking began as social lubrication, but escalated into dependency when his career collapsed during the transition to sound films. MGM purchased his independent production company, stripped him of creative control, and assigned him to films that didn't suit his talents. The loss of artistic freedom, combined with a disastrous first marriage, sent Keaton into a downward spiral. By the early 1930s, he was drinking so heavily he could barely function, yet he continued attempting to work. During this period, he was often drunk on set, missed shooting days, and required handlers to keep him sober enough to perform. His physical skills deteriorated, his timing suffered, and his trademark deadpan expression became a mask for genuine despair. MGM eventually fired him, and he spent years in poverty, taking whatever work he could find while battling his addiction. Keaton was institutionalized multiple times for treatment, including a particularly traumatic stay at a sanitarium where he was placed in a straitjacket. The depression underlying his alcoholism stemmed partly from the cruel irony of his situation. He had revolutionized cinema, but was now considered a has-been, unable to practice his art. His second and third wives struggled to manage his drinking with varying success. Remarkably, Keaton achieved sobriety in the 1940s and experienced a career renaissance in the 1950s and 1960s, appearing in films and television, and finally receiving recognition for his pioneering work. His late career performances, while he was managing his disease, showed flashes of his old genius. 7. Gene Tierney, severe mental illness. Gene Tierney, the hauntingly beautiful star of Laura and Leave Her to Heaven, endured a devastating battle with severe mental illness that required multiple hospitalizations and brutal treatments. In 1953, Tierney suffered a complete nervous breakdown following a series of traumatic events, including the birth of her daughter Daria, who was severely disabled after Tierney contracted rubella during pregnancy, from a fan who broke quarantine to meet her. The guilt and grief overwhelmed her already fragile mental state. She was diagnosed with severe depression and possibly bipolar disorder, though diagnoses were imprecise in that era. Her condition deteriorated to the point where she couldn't work, care for herself, or maintain relationships. Tierney was institutionalized at several facilities, including the Menninger Clinic and Hartford's Institute of Living, where she underwent electroconvulsive therapy, a treatment that, while sometimes effective, was also frightening and carried risks of memory loss. She later described the terror of ECT treatments and the disorientation that followed them. During her illness, she attempted suicide multiple times and spent months in psychiatric facilities, completely absent from Hollywood. The studio system had no mechanism for supporting stars through mental health crises. Illness simply meant the end of one's career. Tierney's absence lasted years, with occasional failed attempts to return to work when she wasn't yet stable. The medications available in the 1950s were primitive compared to modern psychiatric drugs, offering limited relief with significant side effects. Throughout these dark years, Tierney's mother and a few loyal friends provided support, but she faced enormous stigma and gossip about her madness. Remarkably, she eventually stabilized enough to return to acting in the early 1960s, delivering a strong performance in Advise and Consent that earned her critical praise. Her courage in continuing her career after such public struggles with mental illness was extraordinary for that era. 8. Lionel Barrymore, severe arthritis and disability. Lionel Barrymore, the distinguished character actor and member of the legendary Barrymore acting dynasty, spent the final 2 decades of his career in constant, excruciating pain from severe arthritis that eventually confined him to a wheelchair. The condition began affecting him in the 1930s, gradually worsening until he could barely walk by the early 1940s. The pain was so intense that Barrymore sometimes couldn't sleep and required increasingly strong medication to function. In an era when disabled actors were essentially unemployable, Barrymore faced potential career extinction. However, his reputation, talent, and the value studios placed on his name gave him leverage most actors wouldn't have had. MGM, where he was under contract, made accommodations that were unprecedented for the time. Scripts were rewritten to explain why his characters sat throughout scenes or used wheelchairs. Directors positioned cameras to minimize his limited mobility, and special accommodations were made on sets to facilitate his movement. Despite his condition, Barrymore maintained a remarkably active career, appearing in dozens of films throughout the 1940s and early 1950s. He became best known to later audiences as Grandfather Barrymore in the Dr. Kildare film series, where his wheelchair was simply incorporated into the character. The physical challenges of film work while disabled were immense. Long shooting days, uncomfortable positions held for multiple takes, and the exhaustion of managing chronic pain while delivering professional performances. Barrymore also continued his parallel career as a radio actor, where his disability was invisible, but his pain was just as real during long recording sessions. He directed several films from his wheelchair, demonstrating that his creative faculties remained sharp even as his body failed him. Barrymore never complained publicly about his condition, maintaining the stoic professionalism expected of his generation. His ability to adapt and continue working became an inspiration, though the full extent of his daily suffering was known only to those closest to him. 9. Mary Astor, Depression and Addiction. Mary Astor, the elegant actress who delivered an Oscar-winning performance in The Great Lie and played the treacherous Bridget O'Shaughnessy in The Maltese Falcon, fought a lifelong battle with severe depression and addiction to alcohol and prescription medications. Astor's struggles began early, stemming from an oppressive childhood with controlling parents who treated her as a meal ticket, taking her earnings and dictating every aspect of her life. This trauma contributed to depression that plagued her throughout her adult life. She self-medicated with alcohol, which provided temporary relief, but created additional problems, including scandal when her drinking contributed to public incidents and difficult behavior on sets. In the 1940s and 1950s, Astor also became dependent on prescription medications, particularly sedatives and sleeping pills that doctors prescribed freely without understanding addiction risks. The combination of depression, alcohol, and pills created a dangerous cycle that affected her work and personal life. She experienced several career interruptions due to her conditions, sometimes disappearing for weeks when depression made it impossible to function. Studios worked around her absences when possible, valuing her talent, but growing increasingly frustrated with her unreliability. Astor attempted suicide at least once, a desperate act born of overwhelming despair and the feeling that she couldn't escape her demons. Unlike many stars who hid their struggles until death, Astor eventually sought treatment and achieved recovery, becoming sober in the late 1950s. She wrote candidly about her experiences in her autobiography, providing rare insight into the mental health and addiction struggles that Hollywood typically kept hidden. Her honesty was remarkable for the era and helped humanize issues that were deeply stigmatized. Astor's later career, while less prominent, was marked by the stability sobriety brought her. She worked steadily in supporting roles throughout the 1960s, grateful for the opportunity to practice her craft without the chaos that had defined her earlier years. 10. Ray Milland. Alcoholism. Ray Milland, the Welsh-born actor who won an Oscar for playing an alcoholic writer in The Lost Weekend, brought uncomfortably authentic insight to the role because he was drawing from his own battle with the disease. Throughout much of his career, Milland struggled with alcoholism that he managed to keep largely hidden from the public, but that affected his personal life and occasionally his professional reliability. The irony of winning an Academy Award for portraying alcoholism while privately fighting it wasn't lost on Milland, who later admitted the role was both cathartic and triggering. His drinking followed the pattern common among functional alcoholics in Hollywood, controlled enough to maintain his career, but severe enough to damage his health and relationships. Milland was known for disappearing on benders between films, then pulling himself together for work with the help of studio handlers who specialized in managing stars' addictions. His wife Muriel became his anchor, managing his condition and covering for him when necessary, much like the wives of many alcoholic stars of that era. The stress of maintaining his secret while delivering professional performances took a tremendous toll. Unlike the tragic drunk he portrayed in The Lost Weekend, Milland never hit rock bottom publicly, which was both a blessing and a curse. His career continued, but without the crisis that might have forced him into treatment earlier. He eventually achieved sobriety in the 1960s, though he rarely discussed his struggles publicly. In later interviews, Milland occasionally referenced his past issues obliquely, crediting his wife with saving his life. His continued work into the 1980s, including the horror classic The Omen, demonstrated that recovery was possible even after decades of addiction. Milland's case illustrated how Hollywood's culture enabled addiction while simultaneously demanding the appearance of perfect health and control, creating impossible pressures that worsened the very conditions stars were trying to hide. These 10 legendary performers remind us that the golden age of Hollywood glittered with more than just glamour. It shone with extraordinary human courage. Behind every iconic performance lay untold stories of pain endured, fears conquered, and resilience that defied medical limitations. These stars worked in an era that demanded perfection while offering little support for those suffering. Their determination to continue creating art despite devastating illnesses speaks to both their passion for their craft and the harsh realities of studio-era Hollywood. Their legacies live on not just in their films, but in their quiet heroism in facing each day's challenges with dignity.